Good afternoon and welcome to the Museo's online presentation or open book author series. I'm Carol Latham, the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Museum and Cultural Center in Anaheim, and it is our pleasure to welcome you and wish you well. During this afternoon's presentation, we will share the links for each of the authors for additional information and book sales as well. Please enter your questions in the chat and we will do our very best to make sure that they're answered as we go forward. The Museo is a cultural hub for the community, and our mission is to provide engaging programs like this, as well as exhibits that speak to our cultural diversity and the arts. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce Maddie Margarita of LitUp OC. Maddie is a writer and host of LitUp OC, a popular writer's salon in Tustin, California, on which her podcast, Author on the Air Network, is featured. She is on the board of Sisters in Crime and the Southern California Writers Association. So we invite you to get comfy and enjoy this presentation. And Maddie will be introducing the authors for today. Thank you, Maddie, and welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone. As Carol said, I'm Maddie Margarita, and on behalf of LitUp Orange County and our panel today, I'd like to thank you for inviting us into the unique and virtual world of the Museum and Cultural Center in beautiful, sunny Anaheim, California. Each of our authors today has written a compelling story with a very personal connection to their life. And the stories that they've written will offer us insights into dealing with hardship and seemingly insurmountable challenges. But most importantly, I think ultimately they'll offer hope. So I'm going to start by introducing our panel, and I'm honored and proud to do so. Our first panelist, Tanya Hutchison. Tanya is the founder of Phenomenal Women Incorporated, a nonprofit organization for the empowerment of women. Tanya's best-selling book, Phenomenal Beauty, shares intimate details about growing up fast on the streets of Detroit, like being born in the backseat of a police car to a teenage drug addict, and how being physically beautiful was the reason behind a violent assault that left her scarred for life when she was 13 years old. Her latest book, You Are Phenomenal, is a 30-day positive affirmation journal to help change the cycle of defeat for those who are stuck in a rut. Welcome, Tanya. Okay, Tanya, you're muted, just so you know, from now on. Our next panelist is Kwan Win. Quan has been described as a mighty warrior, a magician, and a mountain of goodness. Whoever writes your intros, Quan, I would like to hire. And if you wrote that, good for you. He is a post-release program manager for Defy Ventures, a nonprofit helping those with a criminal past transform their lives through the journey of entrepreneurship. After spending 22 years in and out of correctional institutions, Quan was paroled from a life sentence in 2015 and created his first company 6 months later. The following year, he received the Peace Fellowship Award for his work with the Alternatives to Violence Project. Quan has been featured in Entrepreneur magazine, spoken at One Last Talk, and has appeared on several podcasts. He is the author of Sparrow in the Razor Wire. And last but not least, Ona Russell. At 28, self-described late bloomer Ona returned to school and incrementally earned a BA, MA, and ultimately a PhD in literature from the University of California, San Diego. Teaching for years in various colleges and universities, she developed courses that combined her interdisciplinary interests from poetry in the workplace to the truth of historical fiction and to literature and the law. The story of O'Brien's desk found her and later became a novel. A seasoned public speaker and credentialed mediator, she is passionate about connecting with people, especially helping them find deeper meaning and common ground. Ona's latest book, Son of Nothingness, was inspired by her mother's harrowing experience in a home for unwed mothers. Wow, welcome everyone. First of all, I would like to say I can't think of a better way to spend a wonderful Sunday afternoon than talking books and important messages with you all. So let's start by talking about why you wrote this, why you decided to write the book. Tanya, let's start with you.
I wrote the book because enough people, as I would meet and share bits and pieces of my life, they would say, you should write a book, you should write a book. And so that's how that book came about. But prior to that, I wrote etiquette articles in national magazines for pageants and for entertainment magazines.
Okay, great. You want to talk just a little bit about the story?
My story?
Yeah.
The book, Phenomenal Beauty, it's a memoir, and it's really about real, raw, and relevant things that happened throughout my childhood to adulthood. And it was a journey for me of uncovering the beauty, the true beauty and meaning of beauty. I had modeled, I'd done a variety of different things, but as a young teenager, my physical beauty, because that's how I was identifying beauty in the beginning, was destroyed by some jealous girls that attacked me. And the goal was to destroy my beauty. And at that time they did. I was embarrassed, humiliated. And then there's a chapter that's called A Series of Unfortunate Events. And it begins to unwind and tell about my life. But it came about after a beauty pageant experience where I was Mrs. California, going to Skokie, Illinois to compete. And being Mrs. California, you're groomed, you're going to come back, you're going to win. You've got this team of people that sponsored you. And I didn't even place for the first time. I'm a very competitive individual. I didn't place at all in the pageant. And so on the plane ride home, all the things that people had told me about why I should write this book began to unfold. And it really begins with what happens in life when you don't get what you think you deserve. And so the beauty story evolves there.
Great. Oh, that sounds amazing. Okay. Ona, you want to talk about Son of Nothingness?
Yeah, well, it actually, Son of Nothingness was, came as a result of my prior book, which was a mystery. And there was a character in that book, Andres Martinez, who is a kind of peripheral figure in the book. He's the marginalized figure who's there. He's the son of one of the central characters, who was a labor activist, a farm workers activist, kind of pre-Cesar Chavez. And, but I kept feeling the need to tell his story. And I didn't really see the mystery genre. I published 3 mysteries prior to this. I didn't see the mystery genre as the vehicle to tell his story. And so I wanted to see what happened to him in the prior book. He was 20. I wanted to see what happened to him 20 years later. And so I ended up telling his story in Son of Nothingness, which he is a guy who's conflicted about his Mexican-American identity. He has become a lawyer. He has become very successful, but he never forgave his father his father was, in the prior book, was a wonderful guy in terms of helping society, but he really neglected his son. And so his son has resentment. And as a result of that resentment, kind of went the opposite way and became a kind of business attorney, working for the rich and powerful. But despite all the success, he's rather tormented. And that torment manifests itself in a very odd physical condition, where his leg, it's called Cotard syndrome, in an actual psychological condition where sufferers believe that either one of their limbs or one of their body parts or their entire being is an imposter. And so his psychological condition, his conflicted feelings about his identity manifest themselves in this physical condition. Nevertheless, he's tormented, but he manages. But then a series of things happen that actually are pivotal in his sort of move out of his torment, and he's asked to go on a trip to Sacramento to actually chase down some Nazis. And he actually accepts this challenge, goes on a journey, which, although the ostensible reason for the journey is to track down these Nazis who are hired by the US government to spy on communists, which was an actual thing. He finds other things about himself, and he's on a kind of Odyssean quest. And in fact, there are kind of echoes of the Odyssey in this. And so it's a kind of Chicano Odyssean quest that leads him to answers about not only the Nazis, but about himself.
Okay, and I'm not sure if you covered this, but this is historical fiction, right? This is set in the 1940s, correct?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, it's 1949, post World War II, and World War II has a direct impact on him because in the book, he's rejected. He wants to serve. He wants to go against what his father would have wanted, which was not to serve. He would not wanted him to serve because his father had very torn feelings about, living in America. But he wants to serve and is rejected. He's given a 4F, designation because of his psychological condition. And so this is also a torment for him. And yes, so it's 1949 and it takes place in Los Angeles, and the journey goes to Sacramento, ends up at a home for unwed mothers.
Okay, all right. That sounds like quite a journey. Okay, Quan, do you want to talk a little bit about Sparrow and the Razor Wire?
Sure. Yeah, my book is called Sparrow and the Razor Wire. It's a memoir. It's written for men that are doing long or life-term sentences, and I am sharing with them how did I come to my own sense of freedom years before I was paroled from my life sentence. I wrote the book when I was approached after I did a talk in Colorado by Tucker Max. It was a 4 times New York Times bestseller. Tucker Max, he had approached me and says, hey, I think you could make a bigger impact if you wrote something down. Have you ever been interested in writing? And that's where how him and I became friends, and that's where my writing process began.
Okay, all right, great. So we have two memoirs and a fiction novel that we're talking about today. So we're dealing with real life and fiction, but a lot of the images, we talk about art imitating life and life imitating art. And I think we have that here today. So the topics that I think everybody got a good sense of some of the personal nature and the conflicts that are addressed in these books that we've started to speak about. I'm curious, for the authors, what was the most difficult part of writing this book for you? And let's start with Quan, since he was our last victim. So we'll start with you this time.
Okay, victim. The hardest part for me was actually to write about my early days of juvenile hall and just placing myself back into prison. I just remembered when I was writing it out here, thinking to myself, every part of my my being in prison, I wanted out. And now here I am home. Why am I placing myself back in there? But then I had to remind myself, this book is not about me. If it's really to help the men that I left behind, then this is a small sacrifice to pay. So that's the way I just continued to approach it. And that's the way I wrote it.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable talking about why you were in prison, why you received your life
yeah,
sentence?
absolutely. Yeah, I went to prison for the murder of another human being by the name of Minh Nguyen. I was very involved with a very violent Vietnamese gang. My first arrest came at the age of 17, and it was a long road of going in and out of correctional institutions. I've done 22 years of my life in and out of correctional institutions. And in 1999 was arrested and ultimately convicted of second-degree murder. So I went up to the California state prison system with a life sentence, which at that time it meant a death sentence because California was not paroling anybody. But some laws changed midway, like in I think 2007, and so my book kind of details my journey of spiraling into how it became even worse for me, even in prison with the life sentence, but then how I started finding my way back out.
Okay, great, thank you. I think it's, I speak for everyone when I say it's hard to imagine talking to you today, where you came from. And I think that that's a testament to the human spirit and a lot of other things that have to, I guess, culminate in the success of you being out here and having such your own business. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said earlier, I'm currently the program manager at Defy Ventures, which is a nonprofit. I was involved with them while I was still in prison. And everything about their motto was like, transform your hustle. This is, it's about entrepreneurship, and all those themes, it just resonated with me. I got involved with them, continued with them after I paroled in November of 2015. So that'll be 5 years next month I've been home, and created my first company 6 months after. It's a commercial cleaning company. When I was in prison, I used to work in the prison hospital. So I was trained to, but basically in bloodborne pathogens. I worked in the psych ward. So I was trained how to use PPE, proper equipment, and sanitizing and disinfecting and all that. And I just saw an opportunity when I came home at my brother's real estate company. The owner was looking for a new janitorial company. So I created a company. Yeah, and I emailed him, and well, basically I didn't create the company. I went on GoDaddy and I just go, what's the name of my company going to be called? And it's just stuff that they drove into us at Defy. I looked for gold janitors, platinum janitors, everything was taken. And I say, what about jade janitors? And it wasn't taken. So I bought the domain name for $9.99. And I just emailed the owner and says, my name's Kwan Win. I'm the CEO and owner of Jade Janitors. And that was how it just started. And we just went back and forth. Then I had to create a business license. He asked for like janitorial insurance, which I did not know what that was. So I just Googled it, and it's just like trying to figure things out. And I bought a policy, sent him that, he said, can you give me a quote? And since I worked in the building, I knew how long it would take me to clean it. And I figured, okay, this is, if I put somebody here, this is how many hours it should take them. And this is the margin I want. And I sent the quote off, and he accepted. That was our very first contract, probably like what, 4 years ago. Now my company has about 11 employees right now, but we're in the process of expanding, hopefully within the next month, to about at least 25. We're in the process of training the team nationally. We have several different regions that we're doing.
Wow, congratulations. Well,
thank you.
Best of luck on that. And I'm sure nobody, you probably could not have imagined COVID-19. Yeah, so maybe that was meant to be, Quan. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Tanya, how about you?
The hardest part for me of writing my book was telling the truth. I had to expose some family dysfunction, and it was very difficult because not only is it my story, I'm affecting everybody else in my family. And it was a lot of family secrets of molestation and abuse. My mother was and still is an addicted drug addict. And in the book, I talk about being born in the backseat of a police car. She was literally serving time, and on the way to the hospital, I came. So if you read my birth certificate, it doesn't mention a hospital. It says that I was born in the backseat of a police car. And so that story in itself was embarrassing because I wanted to be like everyone else, and I wanted to pretend I was from a charmed family. And because I modeled and excelled in athleticism and various other things, people assumed that that was who I was. But then I tried to hide and uncover. And then when my physical beauty was scarred, that was the biggest secret that I kept because I was embarrassed. If somebody saw the visible scars on my face, on my chest, for years I would wear my hair long and cover those scars because those physical scars represented those internal scars. And if you saw those scars and asked what happened, it would really just unrattle me that I didn't want people to know my past. And so my story was difficult, but as I say, phenomenal beauty, it's a journey, not a destination. I learned in life that life is a series of adjustments. And in life, when we're making other plans, life seems to kind of happen. So my journey was being uncovered but I was learning valuable lessons about all the painful things and the embarrassment and the shame and the blame and the hate and the anger. And so I was taking all that with me, but yet when it came time to tell the story at that beauty pageant and really stand before you exposing all my visible scars, at that point, I had been healed, and it really didn't matter what other people thought. It mattered because now I wanted you not to see the physical. I wanted you to see the internal beauty that I had. And all I wanted, like most women, you want to be seen, you want to be heard, and you want to be understood. And the worst part for me, people always misunderstood me, or they assumed things about me. And when I would meet people, I wanted them to truly know my heart and who I was. But I was hiding the truth because I was afraid to share it and tell it to anybody. So as I slowly began to trust, and then the betrayal, and then the trust, and then the hurt, and your deep, dark secrets, and somebody exposes it, and just being hurt enough and being at a place where you're at ground zero and realizing what's truly important in life, and learning a story about beauty and what it really is, and what it really does, and what it should be. And it's truly about women, what I learned, because in the book I talk about my mother, who I had a horrible relationship with. I ran away from home at the age of 13 because I was tired of being molested by my grandfather. I was at a place in life where I knew that there was something greater, but I didn't know how to uncover it. And my only way out was to run away from home. And I think it's ironic that being born in a police car, I was literally on the move, and I had continued to move. I never had a home. I'd go from one place to the other. Ended up in college at the age of 16. And then because of that, those secrets, they began to unravel in all my relationships. So the hard part was exposing what I call the phenomenal five in life: the relational, the physical beauty, the financial beauty, the vocation beauty, and the spiritual beauty. All those were broken. And then I began to have an epiphany or a light bulb moment that beauty really, at some point, you're going to be affected in life by those five things. And if you don't learn the lessons now and learn to deal with the hurt and the pain, it's a vicious life cycle. And I wanted to begin, as my friend Kim would say, take that test and pass it so that you can put it behind you and move on to better things. So it was difficult to share that story, but now, who would have thought years later I'd found an organization, and the sole purpose is to unite, empower, and inspire women. And through that, we want authentic bonds of sisterhood and friendship. We want to unite, empower, and inspire women. But in order to do that, you've got to get real. You've got to be raw, and what you're saying has to be relevant.
Wow. Well, I have to, so when you were attacked and you acquired those scars that you were talking about, how old were you? You're muted again, Tanya. I'm sorry.
I was 13 years of age in junior high school, and it happened on the school property where I was leaving a track practice and going into the girls' locker room. And a group of girls came in that I was familiar with. One of them, age 19, said I stole her boyfriend. So it came about because my grandparents, they had legally adopted me, and we lived, and I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, but they decided they wanted to take us back to the country life that they once knew. They bought acreage, farmhouse. So imagine a city girl going from Detroit, life's challenges, moving to a secluded rural dirt streets out in the country, and then having to be in a new environment. So my idea was beauty is you flaunt it. If you've got it and they don't, you put it on parade. And so that was the wrong attitude coming into a new school, because the boys liked it and I liked the attention, but the girls hated me. They despised me. They didn't like me. Who's this new kid on the block? Who's this girl all of a sudden with this long flowy hair? She's tall, she's beautiful. She's now a basketball star. Who is this girl? And so they began to talk, and they began to be jealous, and I'd enter talent shows and various other things, and I was a majorette. So I was the center of attention because my inner soul was broken, but my outer was like, let me show you, I'm all that and a bag of chips, you know? And so through my journey, I had to learn what beauty really was. And I've learned that beauty, you pay a cost for being beautiful. And because I didn't know how to embrace my beauty, it was abrasive, it was intimidating, and girls didn't like it. And so that assault at that school that day was because she brought her friends to say, I'm going to show you, I'm going to take your beauty, I'm going to show you, you're taking my man, which I wasn't even dating or interested in the guy, but we had some interaction because we were involved in the community and some community groups.
So you had those scars when you entered the pageant, right?
I did, years later. I did.
Yeah.
And my idea, not only did I have them at the pageant, I became a successful model through the Ebony Fashion Fair, as well as, I won a reality show. I'm now moving from Michigan to California. I'm signing with an agent. All of a sudden, I'm going on castings, but because my image of physical beauty, I would hide. I would literally cover my scars. I would audition with some hesitation and reservation, but my prayer was always, don't let them see my scars. Please don't let them see the visible scars, because I felt if they saw those physical scars, I wouldn't book the job, because to me, cover girls have to be beautiful. And so I hid that for a lot of years because I was embarrassed. But as I slowly began to tell my story, my slumped over shoulders began to stand tall. My hair began to be pulled back in a bun. I was no longer afraid to show those visible scars, because now at that point, I was able to explain or to share what had happened to me as a child.
Wow. Well, I think it's wonderful, and it shows how full circle you've gone, and being a victim of a group of women to putting together an organization of women in a positive way. So I think that speaks volumes as to how far you've come and healed from that. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Ona, do you want to talk a little bit? I know this is a little different, talking about a fiction story coming off some of these stories, but I know your experience, and I know your point of view and what motivates you to write the stories that you write. So do you want to talk a little bit about the background behind that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I still wear my hair long to hide scars, so it's very interesting that you mentioned that. I think, there's this interesting thing about autobiography or memoir as being, the place to reveal yourself and tell your truth. But fiction, I think in many ways is the place that we authors who write it also tell our truths, but we have a veil that it's called fiction. And we're able to manipulate details in the way that either we wished it could have been, or the way that we, to transform our experience into something imaginative, and the way we would have wanted it. And so I think in my case, I've always been interested in the things that happen on the margins and the people at the margins. I myself I myself am Jewish and was raised in an area where there were very few Jewish people, and there was a great deal of overt and subtle anti-Semitism. And as a result of that, I didn't like being Jewish, and I would often try to hide my Jewish identity. And that went on for quite a while. And I think one of the things that actually began my journey back to my cultural roots was learning when I was in my early 30s that I had a half brother that I didn't know about, and that my mother was in a home for unwed mothers when she was 15 and a half. And that home for unwed mothers was sponsored and run by the Salvation Army and Catholic nuns as well, who not only made her feel shame about her pregnancy, but about being Jewish. And so what she would have to do, she was in this environment where there were, mostly non-Jews, mostly Christians in some capacity, and she would have to repent, and the repenting was not just, again, it wasn't just about the fact that she had gotten pregnant out of wedlock, but it was also the fact that she was Jewish, and that she had to repent, in this foreign religion to her. So there was this double kind of shame that she had, and that she felt, and she carried through her entire life. And in fact, I will say that even now, my mother has Parkinson's disease and has some cognitive problems. I don't know that she would be thrilled that I'm talking about this, because it was something that she kept private and hidden from the family and from friends, from everyone, because the shame was so deep and so powerful to her. However, for me, I wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore her experience. I wanted to explore what happened to her at the home, and as a consequence, what happened to me. Because I think a lot of what happened to her, she inadvertently passed down to me. And so I think what happened is that in that exploration, I became closer and more interested in my Jewish roots. And everything, you kind of feel things happen for a reason in some ways, but I just by chance became aware of this person, Sarah Kaufman, who was this historical figure. That's a long story and goes back to my other books, but nevertheless, this woman who I became very much identified with, she lived in the 1920s and 30s, became my fictional sleuth. I actually related to her in this kind of profound way. And I see there's a direct, link between my mother at the home for unwed mothers, my experience growing up Jewish in Whittier, which was, Richard Nixon's hometown, and this very difficult environment for a Jewish girl to grow up, and then the home for unwed mothers. The other part of this, and I talked about the marginalized part, I'm very interested in, as being a Jewish American, and I have Latino grandchildren, and so I'm interested in the hyphenated, the hyphenated American, and the difficulties that the hyphenated American experiences. And so this book is kind of a combination of all of those things, exploring how someone who is conflicted about their identity and has the pressure of trying to conform to this notion of being an American, how that might be experienced, and how the road to self-discovery and self-acceptance can be a very rocky one. But I was interested in exploring all of those things. And I don't think I really realized, as I was writing the book, all of the influences at work that made me want to tell this particular story.
Okay, interesting. So you were 15 when you found out you had a half sibling. So,
actually, I was 30.
30. 30.
My mother was 15 and a half.
Oh.
How
did you find out?
Well, so I found out because my mother and my mom and dad went on a trip to Sacramento. They kind of told me they were going on a trip there, and I didn't know what it was about. My grandmother, who I was very close to, was staying with me at the time, and I, just out of curiosity, would say, where did they go? Why wouldn't they tell me? We're all very close, where did they go? And my grandmother, who she couldn't really keep a secret very well. And this was a family secret that had been going on for a long time, but when pressed, and she knew that I was going to be finding out soon. So we had this little, I remember we were sitting at a table playing cards, because we always play cards together. And I pressed her. I said, tell me right now, where did they go? And it turned into this laughing, and then serious, and then, are you kidding me? And my grandmother ended up telling me, and she said, do not tell your mother that I told you. Do not tell her. And I never did. I let my mother tell me, which she did the following week. And it was for her, a very difficult disclosure. But for me, it was like, oh, that's cool. Really? And also a moment of recognition and an epiphany that aha, now I understand all of what my mother did, why she was overly protective, why she did so many of the things that she did. And so for me, it was a liberating moment. And I have become very close with my half brother over time. We are tremendously different, but we have become very close and developed a really, really special relationship.
How great is that? So, I mean, I listened to, and I'm sure everybody listening now will agree with me, the scope and the size and the impact of these stories. I mean, how do you set about writing and capturing the heart and the message of the story and do it in a writerly way that draws other people in and tells your story? So as a writer, how did you approach writing your story, this story? Quan, do you want to take that?
Sure. I had laid out a writing schedule for myself. It was 250 words a day, 6 days a week, 1 hour every morning. And I just, that's what I put as carved up for myself every morning. And I just began my writing process of what, we call the vomit draft. That's just what they called it at Scribe. So they call it the vomit draft, and part of it is there was no editing allowed, and I just write it all out. It wasn't until when I was basically done, then I could go back and start rearranging and putting things. One thing that I noticed that helped me later on was because I have these prison transcripts. When we go to a parole hearing, we're issued a parole hearing transcript. And my book goes around a lot of it. So the beginning hook of every chapter, it starts with my actual hearing transcript. So it will say like, presiding commissioner, so you were born in Vietnam, and it says inmate Huynh, yes sir, and then it just goes into, and then I just go into my story from there. One thing that kept me writing is because there was this exercise we used to do in prison. It was like later on when the light came on for me, and I got involved with like facilitating groups and trying to give back and making an impact on like, just the yard I was on, realizing, you know what, I can make an impact in this world, in this little forgotten corner that no one even knows about, but I can make a difference right here, and I could see it in front of my eyes. So at my table, I imagined it was this exercise we call the table of truth, and it's who is seated at my table and why am I writing the book. So for me, at that table were 4 people. It was my 8 and 9-year-old self before my father was diagnosed with leukemia. It was my father who had passed away from leukemia. It was Minh Nguyen, the man that I shot and killed, and then my avatar, which is basically the person who I wrote the book for. It was a spitting image. His name was David. It's the same person that was my bunkie for a long time. He was stuck in a really dark place, and he'll probably never come home from prison. Not because his crime was any worse than anybody else. It was just he had not come to a place of self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, personal responsibility. So that's the way I wrote it. And every time I was struggling, those are the 4 people at my table that, while I'm writing, that kept me accountable, like my North Star. Okay, this is why I have to continue doing this process. And I just continued to write it that way. And when I got to a place where if I'm writing and I go off on a tangent, then I could just ask myself, does this make sense for David and the other avatars? If it doesn't, I could cut it out and I could just continue to just write it that way. Yeah, I think that's the only way I could describe just the beginning of the writing process. And then later on, it's figuring out, okay, what would be more relevant to them? Because the other thing I realized right away is when I was in prison and when I was doing groups, I noticed men were most impacted when I shared of my own vulnerability and I shared my own failures. It wasn't about me being a facilitator and saying, this is what you need to do, this is how you change. So that's the way I wrote the book. It's more, how did I spiral into this dark path and then slowly start to find my way out, but then still detailing where I failed along the way. I know the prison mentality, and I think just human nature in general, and nobody wants to admit that they've done anything wrong, or nobody wants to really cast themselves in a bad light. But I come to believe that's where true power and liberation can come, is that, yeah, this is the ugliest thing I've ever done, and I can be okay with it because I'm no longer that same person. And this is what I'm hoping that the men inside, when they read it, can also come to that, because in the book, it details on me trying to coach some of the men as they were preparing to go to the board. And it also shared like how difficult for a lot of them it was, because there's this script that they've told themselves in their head, you know, or this narrative that they've lived with 20, 25 years in prison already, of how their life is this way, or it's because of these things that happened in their life. But now when they're faced with, okay, now you have to go to parole board and own up to this, it's very difficult. And I think it's just human nature in general to be challenged with accepting our faults, or just even admitting our mistakes. So that's the way I wrote my book, just to share with them, like, hey, this is the raw, ugly truth of how I got to this spot and how I got even worse while in prison. But these are the things I did as I slowly found my way out.
Okay, so I will never forget the Table of Truth story my whole life. As a writer, the rest of my life, that will stick with me forever. So thank you for that.
Cool. You're welcome.
But so when you were writing it, how did you have the urge to try and explain how you got to the situation you were in, or did you focus more on what you did when you got your journey out of that into helping other people? How did you decide where to start? That was a long way into how did you decide where to start?
Well, I wrote it in, like, when I wrote the outline, I don't think I kept into about 40% of my original outline. But as I was writing the vomit draft, I think the story grew its own roots. And then I realized this is my story. This is where I'm going with this. So I started with the actual shooting and my mindset of the night when I did the shooting, how I felt about it. And then I just detail, like, you know, like, I think I wrote, like, the very first sentence in chapter 2 says, I was not born a murderer. And then I kind of detail how my childhood and certain things I experienced growing up, facing racism and stuff like that. And then how I, you know, my father's death and everything else that culminated in me getting arrested the first time. And then just slowly how I started to find my way out. So that's the only way I guess that's the way I wrote it. Yeah, but I didn't, one thing I was like, and there's a story I put in there. It was one of my learning moments in prison when I was interviewed by a woman from the NPR radio. They had come in, and our prison at the time was known for creating a bunch of self-help programs. And I was involved with a lot of the creation of those. So they were interviewing me, and, you know, the interview was going well until it got to the point where she said, well, how long have you been in prison? And at that point, I think it was like 12 years. And she said, what are you in prison for? And up to that moment, I had always said gang-related murder, or, you know, it was a gang murder or something. But that day, like, up to that point, I always wanted to practice what is personal responsibility, what is holding yourself accountable, and what is the honest truth. So I just said, I'm in prison for murder of a human being. And even at that moment, intentionally saying that, everything in me wanted to explain and say, wait, but there was this and that, or what if she thinks this, or what if she thinks I killed my girlfriend, or what if, you know, all these what ifs. But I just sat with it. And the longer I sat with it, the more I felt this amazing sense of liberation just wash over me. Like, yeah, that's what I did, but I'm no longer this person. And that's the way I tried to write my book. Like, this is the cold, harsh, ugly truth. But this is where I found my ability to navigate through it and explain myself at the board. That's how I believe I was found suitable. And I'm hoping the men can read it and hopefully get some small nugget of wisdom out of it. And then they begin to cultivate that in themselves. So when they prepared to go to the board, and even if they don't go to the board, I think it's just how they show up in the world of just, you know, like the other authors on this call are talking about shame and how that affects us. I mean, I know how it affected me, and I saw it in all the men around me. is just shame, and nobody wants to admit this is the worst part. But I think in owning that is where true freedom can lie.
Okay.
So that's the only way I can describe it.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm a little overwhelmed here by what a great answer. I appreciate you being so genuine with us and honest and candid, because that can't be easy. Tanya, your experience, so painful. I mean, for somebody growing up her whole life knowing, even probably as a small child, that you were attractive and good looking, I'm sure that attracted a lot of negative attention, and that was a double-edged sword. But it was a painful experience, and it was a violent attack that you incurred. So how did you decide to write the story? I mean, it sounds like you had a clear message in your mind when you set out to write it, but how did you decide to structure the story so that you could get that message across to other people?
Well, I first had to revisit some very painful moments. And because it was going to be a memoir, it's segments of things that happened. So I had to dig deep and go back, because a lot of it you kind of suppress, a lot of it you don't really want to remember. So I had to uncover or go to those places that really, I think, was like a defining moment in my beauty of where I had to press forward. And so my inspiration comes from God, and I wanted God, that spiritual side, to expose, because I knew the story was bigger than myself. And when I didn't win that national or international competition, it was at that point where I began to hear that inner voice saying that my beauty story is to be told in the right time, in the right season. And at that point, I was being told, don't allow a panel of judges define my beauty or who I am. I would become Mrs. International for just 1 year. My Mrs. California reign was just for a year. But the story that I was about to pen, and that was the inspiration that I got. So my story becomes from inspiration, but yet in order to put the pen to the pages, I had to go back and relive that pain. And so as I began to realize that my story, kind of like Esther in the Bible, was being created for such a time as this, because it's so relevant for 2020, when a lot of things are going wrong for a lot of people, I had to go back and focus on the successes, even though when you're in pain, you don't really feel like a winner, and you don't really feel phenomenal, and you don't feel beautiful. But it was in those moments of my greatest pain, and when I began to have the courage, a very phenomenal woman, Maya Angelou, once said that courage allows the successful woman to fail and to learn powerful lessons from the failure. So in the end, she didn't fail at all. And someone told me that after I didn't win that international pageant, and it really resonated with me, that my story was really a powerful story. And in order for me to tell the story, I had to realize that I didn't lose. I was not a loser. I actually had won, because when you learn valuable lessons from your failure, you're a success. And so at that moment, I began to revisit. So it didn't all come at once. It comes when you're around a certain smell that takes you back to childhood, a song that you may hear that takes you back to a family memory. It takes you to a place of beauty when you're out in nature. It takes you back to seeing flies in a window that reminded me of sitting in a window with my brother. We used to capture flies and pick the wings off. So we used to do a lot of gross things, but it began to take me on a really phenomenal journey. And then I had to think about, okay, I'm here in this beauty pageant experience. And so I began to relate to other people. So I began to ask you, have you ever had something that didn't go your way? Or have you ever wanted something and there was a different outcome? And I began to ask, what about a job promotion? Have you ever felt like you should have gotten that job and someone else got it? should you have married that guy and someone else married him? Did you ever want to do something that someone else did? And what happened and where were you when things didn't turn out the way you thought they should have? And so I began to think about those winning moments. So even though I had been molested since probably the age of 3, as early as I can remember, and it was repeated throughout my life, and it was a secret that I would not tell anybody. And at that point, I felt I was the only one that was happening to. And fast forward later, I share a story when it not only happened to me, it happened to my sister and other people in the family. I went back to a place of having to run away from home at the age of 13, not really knowing where I'm going, but making a plan because I wanted something else. And so I remember at the age of 15, I'm out on my own, I get pregnant, I abort a baby. I talk about what that was like and the pain that I went to college, how I brought so much drama. So I began to think about the boys and the dysfunction because my father was never there. I never knew my father until I began to search after graduation from high school, and I found that side of my family. So reuniting with family and siblings that I didn't know I had. Just financial struggles that I had throughout life. I always worked 2 or 3 jobs, leaving college and finally coming to California because I want to leave the life I once had and start fresh again. But yet, even though I'm leaving these spaces, I'm bringing me to the table, scarred and wounded and just troubled. And
so Tanya, how did you decide, with so much going on, how did you decide where to start the book? Where does your book start?
It starts with defeat in the beauty pageant. So I'm telling that story of what it was like to prepare for that pageant and when I didn't get it. And so I began to really think about the most pivotal moments in my life. And so those became the chapters. I talk about marriage.
Can I interrupt just for a second? The very fact that you had to think about what was the most pivotal moment in your life. And I think that most people would have said, okay, that attack without question had to be the most jarring, horrific experience that you had. But the fact that you stood back and you were able to move forward from that and start with the pageant. And it just is, it's kind of mind blowing how you were able to take control of your life at that point.
But keep in mind, it happened at 13. Now I'm in a beauty pageant, a Mrs. International, Mrs. California. I'm now 45 years of age.
So you put that behind. You didn't start, that wasn't the defining moment. It sounds like the defining moment was the pageant and not the attack, which I think is an interesting thing to think about.
I think for me, the defining moment was really realizing that in life, things will happen because it is that series of adjustments. And in life, there's things that we can't control. So for me to finally get to a point where I have to accept the things that I can't control. My mother's a drug addict. I can accept it now when there was a lot of pain and shame. And then there's a moment in the book when I talk about, I'm pregnant. I have 5 adult children now. I was pregnant with my 4th child. And at that time, I began to want my mother. I wanted that relationship that I never had. And so then I began to find out where she is. She's in a prison in Michigan. I began to write her letters. I began to think about maybe she had experiences like I had. Maybe that's what made her end up in prison and on drugs and doing all the things that she did, abandoning us. It was said that she murdered someone. She just had a history. But then at that point, I was willing to forgive. So the stories about forgiveness and understanding and giving my mother a chance to explain what had happened. And so now, fast forward, she's about to be paroled from prison. And then I'm feeling obligated and asking my husband, is it okay if she's paroled to us? And so now I'm really getting ready to uncover a lot of stuff about a relationship with my mother that I had never addressed. And I told her, I was so embarrassed by her. I didn't want my children to know that that was their grandmother. I didn't want my friends to know that she was my mother. The only person knew that my mother was here in my home, that was my biological mother, was my husband and I. And I asked him not to share that. And so during that moment, now that was like a pivotal moment for me, where some things were really uncovered about my pride and about who I thought I was and I wasn't really, but really, like Quan mentioned, of really accepting her for all of her flaws because I was so flawed, and being able to see her in a light of beauty and not blame her for my failures and not blame her because I blamed her. I'm like, if you were the mother you should have been, I'm thinking in my mind, I never would have had those scars. I wouldn't have been where I was. I would have been in Detroit. So being able to relate to my mother's pain now and shame, and she comes and she's paroled to us. She's coming in as my paid nanny and housekeeper. And then during that time, again, a spiritual enlightenment where I began to see the beauty in my mother that I'd never seen. I began to see that a lot of our characteristics were the same. And I began to really that harshness about me and being numb to her now at this point, I begin to love her in her beauty and begin to see her. And we had a relationship for a short period of time that she lived with us, which convicted me. So now I have to go to my kids and tell them, this is your grandmother. I have to go to the community and tell my friends and my church that the person that you think is my nanny and housekeeper, she's really my biological mother. So now this lie or this mask I was wearing has to be taken down. And even with that story, I'm still exposing things about my mother. So now she's embarrassed because in order for me to tell my story, I have to tell why I was lying. And so now she's in a different place at life, and then I'm exposing her. So it was a lot of hurt and pain and things that happened throughout this journey of uncovering my story and being able to tell that story. But I think the beauty of it all is being able to forgive myself for the lies and the hurt that I caused other people and the shame and the pain and move past that. But really the beauty is to really see in others who they truly are. And I began in this story or this journey, now I can identify with other people, and I'm drawn more to the people that are hiding, that are liars, that are cheating, and I don't see them or get offended by that. I see a side to them where there's hope now because I'm like, oh my gosh, I know where you are. I've been there.
Right.
So I begin to share that story.
Well, I think that's so interesting that when we started and everybody looked at our panel and everybody's different. Everybody looks like they have different experiences, and you start talking and then you realize that there's a lot of commonality on this panel. You know, Ona, you were talking about coming to understand your mother and what she went through and what that told you about yourself. And Tanya had a similar type experience, and you know, the shame and guilt and the scars that we all have, like Kwan was talking about, and Tanya and Ona too. I think that's such, you know, and I think my premise when I started out is that each of you have written a book that will challenge people's perception and hopefully inspire them. Because I know that I can say if I ever complain or start to feel wishy-washy or anything about anything that's happening in my life, I'm certainly going to remember this conversation. My last question, because unfortunately I think we're getting close to our time limit, is kind of based on Kwan's truth table of truth. If you were asked what you want people to walk away with after they finish reading your book, what message do you want them to have, and how would you like them to feel? What kind of an emotion would you like them to feel when they close that book and they finish reading the last page? So let's start with you, Ona. You're muted though, so.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes. So the first word that comes to my head is empathy. You know, empathy for my character, who starts out not very likable, who, you know, initially seems as though he is self-centered, and perhaps doesn't relate to people all that well. He has a parrot who he's very close with, but it may take some work to get to like my character. And I think, in fiction, we always talk about, characters that are sympathetic. We have to have sympathetic characters, but you also want to have a real character, and you want to have a character that changes and develops and grows to have empathy himself, and understanding of his, not only in my case, not only of his father, but of his mother, who in the book was actually a victim of eugenics sterilization. That's something else that comes to happen to him along his journey, is self-discovery, his discovery about his mother. So I would say that by the end, what I'm hoping is that people have empathy for my character and for the women at the home, and for, given our current circumstances, our current political circumstances, the book has ever more relevance. And so I'm hoping that that's what you come away with.
Okay, great. Quan, what are you hoping that people, the message they take away and how they feel when they finish?
Well, it would be twofold. For the men that are incarcerated, I would hope that they walk away with some small semblance of hope in their life, and that they can begin the process of their own change and begin the process of personal responsibility and owning their mistakes and being okay with it. I've actually I've gotten quite a bit of feedback out here from people that have never been incarcerated and how it's affected them. And people have told me like it's made them re-examine their own issues, even though they've never been incarcerated. So I think I would like people out here that have read the book to walk away looking at incarceration differently, like people that have been incarcerated. But I think more importantly, I'd want them to be more forgiving of themselves and with others in their lives that have harmed them or hurt them in some way, or that they haven't been able to forgive. That's what I would hope.
Okay, great. Okay, Tanya. You're muted, Tanya. Sorry.
Sorry. The message that I want them to take away is that it's never too late to become what you might have been. And just think about that. And that, yeah, I would just have to say it's never too late to become what you might have been. And then the feeling I want them to feel is phenomenal. Hashtag you are phenomenal, because I had to tell myself and live that in order to finally rise to that. And the sole purpose of doing that is so that you can elevate your beauty to the highest level possible.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so I want to thank you all. Before I turn this over to Carol to see if there are questions in the chat, and now is a good time for anybody who has questions for our panel to put them in the chat room. If you haven't been putting them in the chat as we went along. Quan, you have do you want to talk about what happens when people buy books, when they buy Sparrow and the Razor Wire, just quickly?
Yeah, I had a promotion during my first week of launch that every book that was purchased, I am matching and donating to someone that's incarcerated. So we have over 1,500 books that are going to be going in and throughout states. So it's going to be California, Washington, New York, Colorado, Illinois. Those are the prisons in each of those so far. I actually just, I'm going to be running another promotion in the next month or so, I'm imagining, because I just got connected with this other organization called Prison Fellowship Ministries, and I donated to them an electronic copy of my book because they said some federal prisoners have access to the internet where they can download it. They're just getting approval on the book, but I just also want to make sure that they are not going to profit off someone downloading the book. As soon as that's all done, then I could give it to them. And I think it's they have a reach of about 48 states. So now it's just me figuring out how else can I maximize this impact and partner with people that want to help me achieve the mission of getting these books into prison.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you. I wanted to be sure we covered that. Okay, Carol, I'm going to turn the camera over to you to talk about what our viewers are saying and any questions that they have.
Well, the comments from our viewers have been so overwhelmingly favorable and full of love for all three of the authors and your stories. In fact, there were a couple of people saying that these should be made into movies so that we can share it with a much broader audience, because the stories are so impactful, whether they are memoirs as in Quan and Tanya's, or in a fictional situation like Ona's. The stories all resonate so beautifully together. And you were saying, Maddie, that, you know, at the very beginning, and you see the authors and you think, what's the commonality that's going to be achieved here? And I think it far exceeded our expectations, at least in my case. I hadn't read Ona's book or Kwan's, but I was very familiar with Tanya's. Any of the authors, do you have a copy of your book that you can just put it up so people can see what it looks like? Okay, yeah, very nice. And in the chat, we have the websites where you can, anyone who is interested can purchase them. I was just wondering, what are you all reading now? How about you, Ona? What are you reading? Unmute yourself.
Yes. So I'm reading, I have about 10 books I read simultaneously, but I will suggest one book in particular that influenced me greatly, recommended by my son, Signs Preceding the End of the World. It's a short book. It's about a border crossing. It's about, you know, very relevant to our time, but an amazing book by Yuri Herrera. And so I wanted to have this actually on hand because the book is so influential to me and so powerful and a magnificent work. I'm also reading a number of different mysteries I've got going simultaneously. I'm still working my way through Wolf Hall. I read, you know, some history, some mystery, and I'm also reading nonfiction, working on another book. I read a lot of nonfiction for the historical component, you know, to get the history. So I'm reading about abortion in the 1950s, illegal abortions. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Okay. How about you, Quan? Oh, you said it was by Yuri Herrera?
Yuri Herrera.
Okay,
Herrera.
Thanks.
Magnificent. I can't say enough about it. One of the best books I've read in a long time.
Fantastic. I was making notes. How about you, Quan? What are you reading?
I'm reading this, well, I'm listening. I'm like Ona, I've been known to read or listen now to several books simultaneously. But two in particular sticking out to me is one is called The Charisma Code by Robin Saul Lieberman. She's talking about like just how to maximize your potential in what she calls charisma. That's her understanding of it. And it's very interesting listening to it. And then I'm also reading a book by Rob Angel called Game Changers. He's the man that created Pictionary. Him and I met going into prison about a year ago, and I totally forgot about him, but he had reached back out to me after my book came out. And so him and I have a thing where we're both going to read each other's books because he wanted to connect with me after to discuss on what him and I can do together to make some type of impact in the world.
Okay. And Tanya, how about you?
I am reading a book that I highly recommend. It's called The Self-Confident Woman, and it's by Janet Congo. She's a marriage and family therapist. She's been one of our speakers at our Phenomenal Women's event. And then I love books. This one, Your Money Counts, anything relating to financial freedom and success. There was a book called The 21-Day Financial Fast. And so I do financial fasts. A lot of people do food fasts, but there's times when I'll challenge myself and say for 30 days, I'm not going to buy anything or shop. But it's really one of my passions is to teach and facilitate workshops, and that's what we do with Phenomenal Women, about financial freedom and the importance of being debt-free so that you can invest in life and ministries in your community.
I almost had my Phenomenal Woman t-shirt on today, but I thought, well, no, let's be a little bit more generic.
Speaking of t-shirts though, funds that we raise to continue our mission is strictly through our phenomenalwomeninc.org organization. So I do have some t-shirts and books and things. Anything you purchase online, 100% of the profits from the book minus the cost goes directly to our organization. So visit our website. It's a great way to support what we're doing. Thank you.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions that came on. You have both gone through so much and came out victorious, and I think you're referring to Quan and Tanya. So number one question, do you feel your experiences made you better people? And number two, if you could live your lives over, would you choose to? And, you know, I'm going to include you in that one as well, Ona, because I think there's some parallels there that can be brought. So, in fact, why don't we go with you first, Ona? Unmute yourself.
Okay, so the first part of the question was,
have your experiences made you a better person?
absolutely. I think that any sort of challenges, any sort of either physical or psychological, emotional challenges, if they don't kill you, you know, it's that expression, if they don't kill you, they're going to make you stronger. In my case, that's true. Absolutely. And also more empathetic, more understanding, more willing to excavate, you know, to go deeper and to look at some of the parts of myself that I don't necessarily like, but accept. And if I could live it over again, would I choose to live it over again? There's a part of me that wants to say, no, I wouldn't. But I think in all honesty, I would. And I wouldn't probably have it any other way, even though there have been some very painful things that while I was going through them, I would say I'd never want to experience this again. But without them, I would not be the person that I am or the writer that I am. So yes.
Okay, I think that's true. How about you, Quan?
Okay.
You've been victorious over your life so far, and how do you feel your experiences have made you a better person? And would you choose to do it over if you could, in a different way?
So, yes, I would say my experiences have made me a better person. If I could choose to live my life over, I would have to say yes, because I do realize regardless what I do from here on out, I cannot bring back a living, breathing human being. So regardless if I go on to make a small impact or a big impact, I don't think it can measure up. So that is, I mean, I love the person I've become, and I love that I see that I can make an impact, but I don't think I could measure that up against a human being's life. So I would have to redo that part of it.
Okay. How about you, Tanya?
I would have to say that I am a work in progress. So even at my age, there's always challenges. But I guess the question is, would I change anything? Or I'm sorry, repeat the question.
If you could live your life over differently, would you choose to?
When I was going through the painful times and trying to overcome the shame and the physical scars, I wanted it so. But now that I'm past that, I think it's those things that have made me the phenomenal woman that I am today. So no, I wouldn't change a thing. I think in order for me to be who I am, I had to have been born the way that I was. I had to have experienced that, because now it makes me more relatable to other people, and it gives me the passion to understand other people. And more importantly, it gives me the courage to never, ever give up in life. So no, I wouldn't change a thing.
Okay. And you know, that's maybe a little bit of a challenging thing, because you see that, oh, it could have been better on one hand, and then it was different on the other. But as you say, there's so many of the aspects of growing up and experiencing those things that had you not had them, you wouldn't have the opportunity to do and be where you are right now, even a work in progress. So,
But I think that gives the flavor to life, our life experience and the challenges that we have. That makes life life. Even though you want it to be perfect and you don't want any drama, you don't want anything to happen. It's in those moments, I think, where I've met other people that have come along the way that I never, ever would have met had it not been for those experiences.
okay. Who are some of the authors who have influenced you over the years? How about you, Ona? Unmute.
Yes. So many, as far back as, you know, Shakespeare, maybe before that, the Greeks, and 19th century authors, because that was the area I did my dissertation in. So I would say George Eliot in particular. And then more recently, go back to Yuri Herrera. And some of the mystery writers for me, Anne Perry, who is somebody that I have been greatly influenced by, historical fiction writers. My mind is going blank, of course, because you're asking me this question right this minute. But you know, mystery writers, all of the mystery writers that do noir, and actually, you know, film noir as well. You know, Raymond Chandler. I've got, you know, it's the literary people as well as the more contemporary popular fiction. It all has a place for me in, you know, in the mix in terms of my writing. And I think my writing tends to be sort of a hybrid, and it's what I am interested in. It's what I teach. So I'm influenced by an array of different kinds of writing. Also, you know, nonfiction. I mean, because I do a lot of nonfiction reading for historical purposes. So there's really a mix in terms of the influence. And I think that T.S. Eliot said that you know, there's this anxiety of influence that we're going to, you know, not be original. We're not going to be able to ever write anything original because there's always going to be influences. But I think those influences result in something, you know, original if you mix them all up and spit something else out. So
Okay.
I think for me, I'm inspired by Rick Warren, The Purpose-Driven Life. I love Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. Danielle Steele, I love her writing. Over the years, I've read so many of her books, and I just wish I could write so flavorful and exciting as she does. Dave Ramsey is one of my favorites, anything relating to financial freedom. And then, of course, the Bible, Jesus Christ is the #1 writer and inspirer for me.
Okay. How about you, Quan? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, man, I could go on forever, but a lot of authors that I like would be Malcolm Gladwell, Stephen Covey from his 7 Habits. I like Jim Collins, Good to Great. I like a lot of business books. Let me see. I like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, even like as a little boy, like when I used to like to read and write, of course, you know, J.R.R. Tolkien. So I don't know. I've read so many different authors, but the ones that have left an influence, I guess, especially later on, of how I would like to make an impact and how I want to show up in the world. It would have to be like more of a lot of the personal development books of, you know, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name now. Who wrote The Road Less Traveled? M. Scott Peck. Yeah, just I don't know, the list goes on. I have a
Looks like Jim
whole bunch of
Rohn and
Yeah.
some of those authors. Well, you know, having had your experience, Quan, and, you know, having spent so many years in prison and starting your business as you came out, did you ever really see yourself that, oh, I'm a writer, that this would be your path?
No, I mean, a funny story is, before I flew out to Austin to begin my writing process through Scribe Media, I had messaged Tucker about a week and a half, 2 weeks before I was going to fly out. And I messaged him because he had sent out a bunch of like his blog pieces on how to begin your writing, who's the avatar, this is a vomit draft, and he laid it all out. And I wrote to him, I mean, I messaged him and I said, hey, Tucker, like, I don't think I have a story. I don't think I should fly out. And if any of you know Tucker or just read any of his books, I mean, he's very straightforward. And he just writes me back right away, Quan, shut the fuck up and just bring your fucking ass out to Austin. Those were his exact words. And he goes, your story's told. So I flew out there. And then even then, like, they had a workshop. There was like 14, 15 people sitting around like this long rectangular table, and everyone had to introduce themselves coming around. We had these little cards. I remember I wrote my name, and under I have to write author. And so I had this, so he said, everyone introduce yourself, say your name, that you're an author, and what your book is for, and what's the title. So as it went around, like, he has like a lot of like entrepreneurs in his workshop. So people, like, I remember this, one of the ones I heard was, oh, I'm a chief marketing officer for a Fortune 500 company. My book is to help other chief marketing officers of companies that make $250,000, 250 million up 10x their thing. And as it went around, I'm listening, and I got more impressed with each person. And I go, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. I think Tucker and them messed up by bringing me out here. So when it came to me, it was like, my name's Kwan Win. I'm an author. I don't know what the name of my book is. I don't know what it's about, but I'm here to begin to learn. And that was what, January of 2019 that I started it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. There's that word. And Tanya, how about you? Did you think that you would be an author as part of all the other things that you do?
No, and I don't think I fully still embrace it. It's kind of hard, and it's interesting because at the time that I was penning the Phenomenal Beauty story, I was contacted by Chicken Soup for the Soul, and they had heard about me through the pageant system, and they asked me to submit a story. So in that Chicken Soup book is part of a story about forgiveness and beauty that they accepted to go. So it's really interesting how I went on a book tour within the same year that I was ending my reign as Mrs. California. So no, I'm learning to embrace it. I'm working on my next book now, but yeah, I'm still in the process, and it's kind of hard to say that I'm an author.
Wrap your head around it.
So thanks for including me. I'm owning it now. It's 2020, so I am an author. I said it.
Well, I was so inspired by your book many, many years ago when I first read them. So, author Tanya Hutchison.
Thank
How
you.
about you, Ona? Unmute yourself.
Oh, yes, I'm unmuted. What's the question again? I'm
I
sorry.
was just asking if you had ever seen yourself as an author, or it was something that you had planned.
I actually did not. I was an academic and taught the college level for many years and did academic writing, but the material found me. And when the material finds you and the moment is right, and you've been prepared, which I think I was in my training to some extent, I felt compelled to write the first novel. I did not, I had assumed because I had a background in literature that I could just write out a novel and it would be like the greatest thing that, with a big bestseller. And then I realized, oh my God, no, it was no,
Mm-hmm.
So, but it took me a while to, after workshopping and having some humility and realizing that just because you can teach literature doesn't mean you can write at all. So it took me a long time And I feel like now, just now, I feel like my first 3 books in some ways were practice. And I feel like just now that I'm feeling, you know, somewhat what it feels like to actually be an author. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, if you're not if you're not moving forward, you know, you're just, you know, it's a humbling process, and you read a lot of other people's writing and realize you got a long way to go.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, the Museo, we have a program that we started at the beginning of October, and it's 31 days till done. And it's a poetry program with John Brantingham. And it is writing each day with a prompt, a little poem. So I've been doing that. It is hard, but you know, it is so rewarding to be able to get that, whatever it is that's inside out, whether it makes sense to you or anybody else. It's just getting it out there. So thank you.
I can just
And go ahead.
I can just say, just like Maddie, I will never forget what Quan said about that table. Okay.
Table of 4. Yeah, I wrote it on my notes.
One of the most brilliant, insightful,
Table of truth.
inspiring table of truth. I will this is going to, I mean, I'm just, I think it was an amazing concept, and something that I think can be kind of transformational.
Yeah.
So Quan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
Well, I'm going to,
You're welcome.
before I close, I'm going to come back to you, Maddie. Is there anything about LitUp OC that you might want to say? And then I'll end the session today.
Well, I think everyone on the panel has said it better than me, and shown better than words could describe how wonderful it is to be around creative people who have a message and have important things to say. So I just want to say that. And also, if you enjoyed today, we have LitUp OC again Tuesday, October 27th with Jonathan Mayberry, I think he's listed as one of the top 10 horror writers in our lifetime, in history. So he's a tremendous writer. He writes everything, not just horror. And Joe Ide, who's a fabulous mystery writer who writes Isaiah Watanabe, who's Sherlock Holmes meets the Hood. I think that's his description. So it should be fun. So that's Tuesday night, October 27th at 6:30. And there's a link in the chat if you're interested and would like a link to that program. Just send me a note on maddiemargarita@gmail.com, and I'll send you the link.
Okay. Tanya just sent me a little message that she has a poem that she would like to close with. So we'll go to Tanya, and after she's done that, then I will end the session. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, Carol. I think with the 2020 and all that's going on, it's called Think Positive. If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. Success begins with your own will. It's all in your state of mind. Life's battles are not always won by those who are stronger or faster. Sooner or later, the person who wins is the person who thinks she can or he can. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope that the panel, you've had a chance to look at the comments in the chat, because they have been so overwhelmingly appreciative. Let me remind you that this program has been recorded and will be available on Facebook Live. Let us know your thoughts on this program. We want to continue at the Museo to bring you relevant programs that will resonate with you, not only in the immediate time that you're watching, but throughout the rest of the month, your life. Let us know your thoughts on that. Thank you to Ona Russell, to Kwan Win, Tanya Hutchison, for sharing your authenticity and your passion and your phenomenal beings that you are. And of course, to Maddie Margarita. You've assembled an amazing panel of authors. So thank you so very much. And to you, our viewing audience, thank you for taking these 90 minutes on a Sunday afternoon when you could be watching, some ball game or doing something else. So we appreciate you taking your time to join us. And so until the next time, Stay safe.